What's up guys, Uncasual Gamer here, and today we are delving into one of Nintendo's most legendary handheld systems, and that of course is the Nintendo DS. Maybe you're wanting to pick one up for retro gaming in 2025, maybe you want to revisit some of those older hits, games like Nintendogs, like Mario Kart, maybe the Pokemon titles. We're going to be breaking down everything that you need to know, including the pros and cons, the current prices, and ultimately which version of the Nintendo DS you should pick up in 2025. Let's get straight into it. And where else to start but with the original DS, sometimes called the Fat DS because it's obviously bigger than the versions that kind of came after it. This released in 2004 and 2005 around the world. It was obviously legendary for its dual screens, which is what DS actually stands for. The bottom screen was a touchscreen, and this basic similar design was replicated throughout all the next variants of the DS as well. So this is what kind of launched it all and rivaled Sony's PlayStation Portable, the PSP. Now it goes to say that this obviously is a bit of a bulkier and not a sleek design as some of the DSs we'll look at very shortly. And the key things to look out if you're going to pick up one of these in 2025 are the battery life on these. Now because they're like 20 years old this and last year, in 2025 the batteries on these do deteriorate quite a lot for the older consoles. Now you can't really check if you're picking one up at a car boot sale or something. Obviously if you get one from CEX you're going to get a 5-year warranty on that, like you get with all the hardware, so that's what I'd recommend. If you're getting one of the older ones, do pick one up from somewhere like CEX. And some of the positives with this console is obviously that nostalgia is a big one. This is the first one that ever came out. You know, this is still in my eyes, when people say Nintendo DS, this is the one that you picture in your head. It's just that really classic Nintendo DS, early 2000s style. Still to me, to be honest, looks great. It obviously initially launched in a grey, a blue and a pink design. So you've got the choice of the three colours as well. And what this thing did really well was it includes a Game Boy Advance slot on the bottom, so you can play Game Boy Advance games as well as Nintendo DS games. Now we'll obviously go on to talk about some of the other variants shortly, but they don't all include the Game Boy Advance slot, so that's a real plus if you're going for one of the original consoles. Another slight issue to note if you're going for the original DS is that, given it was the first model, the hinges on this are not the best as what they are on some of the later models. You will quite often find the hinges broken or even the hinges quite weak. So just if you are buying one, you know, give it a play around, make sure the hinge is nice. On this one, it's in really good condition. I was lucky to pick this one Vinted. And if you are picking up one of the original models, the price you're looking at over here in the UK is probably about £30 to £40, I'd say. That's getting you an okay deal if it's in okay condition. You will find them for £10, £15 on Vinted and eBay with loads of scratches and damage to the screens. And nicely in a box condition, you're probably looking at over £50 for a good condition one. So that's the original Fat DS. Let's move on to the DS Lite. So the DS Lite came along in 2006, and yeah, first off, it was a sleeker, slimmer and lighter design, hence the name Nintendo DS Lite. And if we compare it to the original, you'll see it's pretty much in every sense slightly smaller in all aspects. However, it does most of the stuff the same. So obviously you can put your DS carts in there. It retained the Game Boy Advance cart on the back, which is obviously really good for people who have got Game Boy Advance games, or at the time of Game Boy Advance games, or if you've got a Game Boy Advance collection today and you've got loads of Game Boy Advance games, you can obviously play them on the DS system. What's really nice about this is it's probably not bigger than a mobile phone today, so it can slip in your pocket really easily. You know, it just goes in my pocket and it essentially, obviously a little bit thicker, but it feels like I've got a phone in my pocket. So if you are picking one up in 2025, this one is really handy just to pop in your pocket, pop in your bag and take out with you for the day. And the light didn't just mean the console was lighter in weight, because the screens on this one are also a little bit brighter and a little bit better than the original. So if you're playing in kind of highlight outside, this console is going to be, it's going to perform better basically. It's going to let you see the screens and the games that little much better than if you picked up a fat console that we've just spoken about. Now some of the issues with this one is that once again, it did have a fairly weak hinge. So again, to look out for, if you are picking one up, just give it a little wobble, check the screen feels okay. You know, you don't want a broken hinge on here. Also, lots of these consoles, again, given the age of them, are scratched and have very scratched screens, in particular the bottom screen where the stylus was used. If somebody's not had a screen protector on there, then these screens do get ruffled up fairly badly. So yeah, just have a good check. Other than that, it's a pretty safe console to go for. At the end of this video, we will rank all four of the DS family systems, and let you know which we think is best. But most collectors and most players or most Nintendo fans do say that this one is probably the sweet spot in terms of having the newer features, the newer screens, but also having the backwards compatibility with Game Boy Advance and being such a small handheld console. So the third console that Nintendo brought out was the Nintendo DSi, and this is where a lot of the technological changes kind of came in all at once. So firstly, this has a SD card slot on the side, which let you save games to it, download games from the online store. However, it also opened up a bit of a modder and a hacker network online. So what you could do is, lots of these are really easy to hack, add emulators to there, put Game Boy games on, especially in 2025 when Nintendo are no longer kind of blocking that kind of thing. This one released in 2009, and it also added two cameras. So one camera to the front of the console and one camera in the middle on the inside. Now, in my opinion, the cameras are kind of super gimmicky. I've never known anyone to actually need to use the cameras. I don't think many of the games use the cameras on these. But it was that time in gaming in the late 2000s where Xbox were thinking about bringing out Kinect, and I think iToy would be on the PS2 and the PlayStation 3 were bringing out a camera, and cameras were becoming on smartphones ever better every year, and it was just kind of like every every digital device had to have a camera on it. Today, I think I wouldn't pick one up if you are wanting a camera on your DSi. There's literally just no point of it. It's really poor quality as well. Now, some of the big issues with this console are that firstly, Nintendo removed the Game Boy Advance slot. Now, obviously, as we've already mentioned, that was a massive positive for the previous two consoles. Now, if you have no Game Boy Advance games and have no intention of playing any Game Boy Advance games on the Nintendo DS, then it's obviously not going to bother you in the slightest. However, it was a big factor back in the day, and it still is now for a lot of collectors, because those who have Game Boy Advance games obviously can't play them on this system. You are essentially just locked to Nintendo DS games, unless you get an SD card and you add them to that. And also, the battery life on this console was much worse than the DS Lite, and that's just because of the added features in there. So obviously it takes battery to run the new features. The screens, again, I think on this one were the same as the DS Lite, but the features like the camera and the software, and it had Wi-Fi capability, and similar price to the DS Lite. Obviously, it's a newer console than the DS Lite, so you're probably going to find them in slightly better condition, given they're not quite as old. And obviously, this one is going to be whether you want the SD card slot and whether you don't mind having the Game Boy Advance slot. It's kind of a toss between Game Boy Advance or SD card slot. Which would you prefer? Apart from that, it is very similar to the DS Lite in a lot of ways. Obviously, I don't think the camera matters at all, and given that the Nintendo DS shop is now shut down, then the Wi-Fi connectivity doesn't also matter all that much. Now, obviously, the lack of Game Boy Advance slot is disappointing. However, because it's got the SD card slot, there are ways to mod and hack these consoles to get all your favourite games on there. It's obviously not as easy as picking up a Game Boy Advance card and putting it in, but there are ways around it, which I'm sure if you're interested in, you can find more about online. And then on to the fourth and final iteration of the Nintendo DS family, and that is the Nintendo DSi XL. This released in 2009 and 2010 around the world, and it kind of does what it says in the name. It's a DSi, but it's bigger, much bigger in fact. So as you can see here, the console is roughly 30% bigger, and it had a bigger battery in, which means the battery life is also much better than that on the DSi regular. Now this has obviously got much bigger screens, but also better screens. I find that out of all four consoles, the DSi XL has the best screens to look at. That might just be me, I'm not sure of the exact technicalities, but the DSi XL, definitely if you put a game in all four consoles, this is the one that looks the best. And obviously the screens, like we've mentioned already, are much, much bigger, which makes them much easier to see. It obviously came with all the same functionality as the DSi, so you've got the two cameras, one on the front, one on the centre, and you've still got the SD card slot on the side of the console. And again with the DSi, you have not got the Game Boy Advance slot on the bottom, unlike the DS Lite and the original Fat DS. So what's bad about this console? Well, firstly, as we've just mentioned, the Game Boy Advance slot is not there. And this has got all the same functionality as the previous DSi, as you'd expect. We've got the camera on the front and on the back, and we have got the SD card slot on the side. So you might be thinking, well, what's bad with this console? It sounds better than all the others. Well, firstly, like the DSi, again, it's not got the Game Boy Advance slot on the back, which can be an issue for some people. But probably the biggest issue with this one, I would say personally, is just the size of it, especially into, now I know mobile phones are big these days, but This definitely feels, I've got quite big hands, I'm 6'1". This does feel bulky in the hand today. It fits in my pocket, but I can feel it in there. It looks a bit silly in my pocket when I'm walking around. So yeah, this bulkiness is not ideal. However, if you're playing at home, in your living room, in your bedroom, then it probably is better because of the screens. But if you are wanting it for a travel companion, for example, something you can take out with you, the portability aspect, then the DSi XL definitely does feel a lot bigger than the previous 3 consoles. And if you're picking one of these up today, they do go for a little bit more than the DSi and the DS Lite. You're looking at about £60 to £80 for one, again, in alright condition. And once again, I'm not sponsored by CX or anything, but yeah, I'd recommend picking one up from CEX just for that warranty if you are going for one. Okay, things to look out for if you're buying a DS in 2025. Firstly is the charger situation. So really annoyingly, the original DS, the DS Lite and the DSi all had different chargers. So what that means is, say you're at a car boot and you spot a DSi for really cheap, you've got a DS Lite at home with a charger, the DSi hasn't got a charger, you get home, you realise you can't charge it. So yeah, the first thing to look out for is make sure it's got a charger with it and make sure it's the right charger for that console. Secondly is make sure it's got a stylus. So in the original, the styluses are on the back, and on the newer models, the stylus is on the side. The touchscreen is one of the key selling points of a Nintendo DS, and most games require it in some kind of form or guise the touchscreen to be used. It's really hard to use with your finger, especially if you've got fatter or chubbier fingers. So having a stylus makes it that much easier to play, and also just make sure the console is complete. As I've already mentioned, check that the hinges are okay. Notoriously, the DS has really weak hinges, and if you go on eBay, you'll see tons that have got broken hinges for really cheap, because they obviously hinder the console massively. So yeah, just make sure you've got a good hinge on it. Next up is battery life. It's obviously hard to check at the time if the battery life is good if you're picking one up again at a car boot or on Vinted. You can ask the seller, what is the battery life good? Most consoles are not going to have as good a battery life as they had 20 years ago when they came out in 2005 to 2010-ish. But some will have decent battery life still. And obviously when you get home, you can check it just by charging to full, seeing how long the battery lasts on it. It goes without saying, have a really good look at the screens, make sure there is no heavy scratches or kind of wear and tear on them. The bottom screen will naturally have some wear and tear, but this is the most important one to make sure there's nothing too heavy on there. If there is really heavy marks and scratches, this can misinterpret when you're using the touchscreen. And like we've already mentioned, most games do require the touchscreen. So you want to make sure that is in okay condition, or at least playable condition. And finally, just to mention that the DS family, the entire family, is all region free, which means you can buy a game from Japan, play it on a DS console from the UK, you can buy a DS game from the UK and play it on a console from America, and all vice versa. The only thing that's not region free is any software downloaded from the DSiWare store, so just be cautious of that. Not that it really matters in today's day when the store is all closed down. So finally, which console should you buy in 2025 if you're looking to pick up a Nintendo DS? And I'm going to rank them from 4th to 1st. In 4th, I am going to pick the DSi Standard. For me, the cameras don't matter on this one, and I've got no intention of using the SD card slot either. Obviously, I'm a collector. If I've got Game Boy Advance games, I'm going to use the actual Game Boy Advance games rather than emulate them on a card. This doesn't really, for me, offer an advantage over any of the other 3 consoles, or the advantage it does offer doesn't warrant enough for picking it up. E.g., it's light, it's smaller and lighter than the DSi XL, but if I want a small lighter console, I'll just get the Nintendo DS Lite. It's obviously not a bad console in any way, but yeah, for me, this is number 4th on the list, and the least recommended one that I would pick up. In at 3rd is the original fat Nintendo DS. Now, obviously, this is where it all started, and the nostalgia for me is what places it probably at number 3. But the nostalgia is also the only thing, really, that makes it worth picking up over any of the other consoles, because, yeah, it's got the Game Boy Advance slot, but it's bigger, it's bulkier, the screens are not as good as the other consoles that came after it. So if you're a collector, again, if you want that nostalgia, if you had this one as a kid growing up or as a younger person growing up, then jump back into it. It's going to serve you well. It's still a great console. But this is number 3 on the list, which leaves 2 remaining consoles. In at number 2 is the DSi XL. Like we've already mentioned, you know, this is a DSi, but it's better because the screens are so good on this one. If I'm playing a game and I'm sat at home and I've got all my DSs in front of me and I've got about 8 of them, the DSi XL is the one that I pick up and play, just because it looks that much better than the rest to play on. The battery life's really good on it, and it's much bigger in the hands, so bigger hands like myself, it's just much more comfortable to play. So this is at number 2, which means that I think the best Nintendo DS console to pick up in 2025 is the DS Lite. We've already mentioned this is probably the sweet spot between them all. It's got better screens and battery life than the original one. It's super small and light, especially compared to the DSi XL as well. It's smaller than most mobile phones these days. It fits in your pocket really, really nicely. And over the DSi, it has the Game Boy Advance slot on the back, which even if you've not got Game Boy Collection now, you know, if you find Game Boy Advance games in the future, it's really nice just to have the option to pop them in and play them on this. These come in loads of various colours. Loads of like bright green colours, pink colours, rose gold colours, red colours. So again, how you want it to look is completely up to you. There are loads of options out there. And yeah, that is which I would recommend picking up in 2025. Alright, so that's it for my Nintendo DS buying guide in 2025. If you found that really helpful, if you enjoyed the video, please drop me a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know down in the comments which DS you're picking up this year, or which DS you already have, or which DS you recommend picking up. As always, thanks for watching, and keep gaming.